Part 12, Chapter 23. The fireball seemed to spring from the red smudge of dawn which was just appearing on the horizon. "Jesus Christ!" cried Pritchett. "Novichek," muttered Johnson. "Dumb fuck," complained Deakins. Pritchett turned to Deakins, who was standing beside him, watching the spectacle. "We don't have to worry about the other pilot," Pritchett said. "Then how come the helicopter crashed?" Deakins said, "Pilot error." Pritchett looked at him. "Perhaps your error, pilot." Deakins didn't react. "Must have hit a canyon wall," said Kelly. "You think?" Baker said, "Maybe sand got in the intake." Deakins said, "Maybe. Or maybe Novichek wasn't paying attention to what he was doing." He turned to Pritchett. "You hired him. You tell me." "I don't think it was Novichek," Pritchett said. "I could swear I heard gunshots, Deakins. Didn't you?" "No," Deakins said. "All I heard were the M60s. The Major lit a cigarette and walked to the pit, where Baker and Kelly were working on the first of the nuclear bombs. They were in the process of delicately removing the pointed, yard-long front section of the weapon. Pritchett followed him. "Tell me again how I don't need to be here." "You don't." "But you said you planned this carefully." "I have," said Deakins. "I see." Pritchett stood there tapping his foot. "So losing a helicopter was part of it?" "It was factored in, yes." "And how are we going to move the weapons now?" Deakins said, "With the trucks. That's why they're here." "Ah, we move to the trucks now," Pritchett said. "Just like that." Deakins looked at him. "Yeah, just like that." "Well, Major, just so you know, I spent a lot of money underwriting this, and frankly, you're beginning to shake my confidence." Deakins smiled at him. The men were watching them. Deakins turned and smiled at them all. "Mr. Pritchett here doesn't know much about nuclear weapons," Deakins said. "But he does know a lot about money. Worries about it all the time." Deakins looked at Pritchett again and smiled a friendly smile. "Now, I appreciate just how much money you and your associates have invested in this operation," Deakins said. "But see, that's what it is." Deakins rested a hand on Pritchett's shoulder. He squeezed. "A military operation. And you don't know diddly piss about that." As Deakins squeezed harder, his smile faded. "I've been in the military for 20 years. Spent 2 of them in the War College in Montgomery. Planned and flew over 100 missions in the Gulf." "I have your CV," Pritchett said. "Good. Because what I'm trying to say is, this is what I do." Pritchett replied. "And what I'm trying to say is, I'm not sure you're doing it very well." Deakins lifted his hand. He brushed imaginary dust from Pritchett's shoulder. Then he patted the side of Pritchett's face. "You're not sure I'm doing it very well." "No." Deakins patted harder. "You have a great deal of military experience, do you?" He struck him harder still. Pritchett raised his arm and used his wrist to block Deakins' hand. "No, Major, I don't. What does that have to do with anything?" Deakins looked at him for a moment, then lowered his hand. Well, Mr. Pritchett, let's see if I can clarify things for you. We're in a battle, and combat is a fluid situation. So you plan for contingencies, which I have, and you keep the initiative, which I will. But what you don't do is, can you guess? Pritchett said nothing. Go on, give it a try. Pritchett remained silent. Bzzzt, Deakins said. Time's up. What you don't do, Mr. Pritchett, is share command. It's just never a good idea. So while you're the backer, I'm the boss. Got that? Rest assured that the boss understands the backer's concerns. You and your associates gave me a lot of money to mount this operation. But don't worry, they're going to get 10 times the amount back if we succeed. Pritchett drew air through his nose. What do you mean, if we succeed? Deakins slapped Pritchett's face lightly with each syllable. I mean, if we succeed. He stepped back. We've got the nukes. He looked at his watch. 17 minutes ahead of schedule. And everything will be in place within 2 hours. As I've said from the start, the only thing I can't guarantee is that the assholes in Washington won't do something stupid, like think I'm bluffing and refuse to pay. Pritchett said, And if they don't pay, are you really prepared to go to the next step? Deakins turned to Pritchett. The Major's mouth was relaxed now, his eyes cold. Primed and ready, he said. If they refuse to pay, then the Southwest will be a very quiet neighborhood for about, the next 10,000 years. Finishing his cigarette, Deakins flicked it aside, then sat on the edge of the pit, grabbed the rope, and joined the other 2 men below. Chapter 24. Everyone but White House Chief of Staff Baird had decided to take a break from sitting in the Pentagon Situation Room and doing nothing but waiting and speculating. Giles was airborne, headed to the crash site via Gulfstream jet. General Creeley was stretched out on a couch in the adjoining waiting room. General Schneider was talking with one of the night secretaries, a Gulf War veteran who was young enough to be his daughter, and Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman Dreyfus was on the phone with his advisors in a borrowed office. Baird paused the blockout game on the computer and looked at his watch for the second time that minute. 7:28. It was 4:28 in Las Vegas, still too early to call the president. Besides, when he finally called, Baird wanted to be able to tell him something other than that the Air Force had been cold-cocked. He wanted to say that they'd taken the offensive, even though that was a rarity these days, when the press learned things before they did and put them on the defensive. It was even worse now than it had been just 5 years before, when he'd been a big city mayor. And it had been pretty bad back then. He leaned back so he could see Creeley outside the door. How much longer until that satellite's in position? Baird asked. Creeley raised his wrist in front of his face. 40 minutes. Baird said, I don't understand why we haven't got one any closer. Because, Creeley replied, we don't usually spy on ourselves. Baird's phone beeped and he scooped it up. Yes. It's Giles, said the caller. I've been thinking. About what? Baird asked impatiently. He wanted something to happen, not someone to think. What if this wasn't pilot error? Creeley wandered in, followed by Schneider. Schneider pointed to his ears, and Baird put the call on speaker. Is this a theoretical question, Giles, or do you have something? I think I have something, Giles said. In the last transmission from the plane, Major Deakin said that Captain Hale had lost it and made the plane crash. We assumed that he meant pilot error. Giles, this is Creeley, said the general. What else could it mean? What if Deakins was trying to tell us that Hale made the plane crash? Mister, the general said indignantly, that's what I thought you were going to say. Let me set your mental processes on the right track before there's a career-stopping crack-up. Our pilots are scrutinized closer than luggage from Medellin. They just don't go bad. Besides, said Baird, it doesn't make any sense. Why crash a B-3? Apparently unfazed by Creeley's screed, Giles said, because 2 nuclear weapons would be worth a hell of a lot more money than an Air Force pension. Crashing the plane means we have to sift through the wreckage for clues, and that takes time. Dreyfus had returned, along with 2 assistants. To whom would these warheads be worth money? He asked. Son, there are easier ways for someone to buy nuclear weapons. You go to one of the old Soviet republics. They'll fix you up with a couple for the price of a BMW. I don't mean they'd be worth a lot of money on the open market, Giles said. I mean they'd be worth a lot of money to us. I don't follow, said Dreyfus. What I'm saying is, how much would we pay to get them back? Giles asked. The United States, to make sure that they weren't used in this country. Dreyfus no longer appeared so confident. He glanced at Creeley, who looked as if he'd swung too hard with his bat and hit himself in the back of the head. Schneider's arms were folded, and he didn't look happy. Hold on, Giles, hold on, Baird said. General Creeley, those nukes have codes or something that prevent people from using them, don't they? Of course, Creeley said, recovering slightly. Absolutely. And no one has these codes, Baird continued, outside of the president and you guys, right? Right, said Creeley. Access to those codes requires the highest security. Level 8 at least. Pilots like Hale are 7, tops. Baird looked at him. But General Deakins is an 8. Creeley looked at his computer monitor, brought up the crew dossier, and read Deakins' particulars. You're right, he said. That shouldn't have been allowed. Somebody got careless. I'll say, Baird said. If Hale has him, he can beat or drug the codes out of him. Dreyfus turned to one of his assistants. Get me a psych profile on both men. Yes, sir, said the young man, who turned smartly and left the situation room. Dreyfus said to his other aide, Where's that nest team now? The young woman looked at her watch. They were scheduled to take off 20 minutes ago. Who's in charge? Dreyfus asked. Colonel Hunt, she said. Get him on the phone, the chairman said gravely. He faced the speakerphone. Mr. Prentice. Sir, said Giles. That was heads-up work, son. Nicely done. We'll let you know how it turns out. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Giles said as Creeley and Baird sat a little lower in their seats.